This is a study vlog about Of Mice and Men, and we're looking today at chapter 3. Now, the first section of chapter 3 gives us a conversation between George and Slim and gives us an insight really into the background of how George and Lenny came to be friends and travel around to find work together. Slim is surprised that George and Lenny travel together. He says, "I hardly never seen two guys travel together. You know how the hands are, they just come in, get their bunk, work a month, then they quit and go out alone. Never seem to give a damn about nobody." And I think that shows that traditionally migrant workers in the 1930s had a very solitary lifestyle. They went from farm to farm, picking up what work they could. It's very unusual for two guys to be friends and to stick together. So this really makes George and Lenny different. That's going to become really important, particularly as the story progresses and the choices that George is going to have to make. George tells Slim, "If I was bright, if I was even a little bit smart, I'd have my own little place and I'd be bringing in my own crops." In many ways, George and Lenny's dream to own their own farm and bring in their own harvest is typical of many migrant workers. Instead of this lifestyle where they've got the bindle on the back moving around all the time, they'd have somewhere to call home. And it's something that a lot of workers would have dreamed about doing. It's a bit like a potted version of the American dream, the idea that anyone from anywhere could save up enough money to get their own piece of land. But in many ways, it's going to become really out of reach for these guys because of how little wages they earn and also their inability to really stick at anything for that very long and stay in one place. George gives a bit of insight into how he used to treat Lenny. In the 1930s, someone like Lenny, who's clearly got a very simple understanding of the world and isn't very bright, someone like Lenny would have been made fun of, taken advantage of a lot, and George used to join in. He told Lenny to just jump in the river one day and Lenny nearly drowned. After that, George decided to change his attitude towards Lenny. He decided to look out for him a bit more. George decides to look after Lenny even though sometimes that's really hard work because Lenny often makes mistakes. George opens up to Slim and tells him a little bit more about what happened in Weed. We knew from the first chapter that they had to leave in a rush and had to hide in a ditch. George gives a little bit more detail. Here's what George says Lenny did in Weed. He's seen this girl in a red dress. And the thing is with Lenny, as we've seen from chapter 1, he always wants to touch different textures and fabrics. So he wanted to feel the dress of the girl. So he reaches out to feel this red dress and the girl lets out a squawk. That gets Lenny all mixed up and he holds on because that's the only thing he can think to do. And basically the long and the short of it is the girl tells the law that she's been raped by Lenny, and the guys in Weed set out a party to lynch Lenny. So basically a bunch of guys going to hunt him down and just hang him from a tree somewhere publicly. Lynch mobs were pretty common in the 1930s, and whilst they weren't legal, there wasn't much that people could do to stop them when that many people got together to do that. So George and Lenny had to hide in a ditch, and then this is where they've come from. Now this incident is really important for a number of reasons. Isn't it interesting that Lenny saw a girl in a red dress? What colour dress was Curly's wife wearing when we first met her in chapter 2? That's right, red, the colour of danger. Also, Steinbeck set up really well Lenny's tendency towards texture, that he really likes to feel things, and Steinbeck sets up here the fact that when he grabs onto something, he won't let go. Now we know that Lenny is really strong, and that is also going to just prove to be a bit of a deadly combination later on in the story. Now chapter 3 then moves on to talk about Candy's dog, and I want to focus on this section for a little bit because it's really symbolic about how people in the 1930s would view the old, the disabled, those who can't work anymore. So we've known from an earlier chapter that Candy's dog is coming to the end of its days. Carlson really can't stand the smell of the dog in the bunkhouse, which is obviously a shared space. So he suggests that because Slim's dog has just had some puppies, that Candy has a puppy and Carlson will shoot Candy's dog. Now, it's really interesting to note how the different characters respond to the idea of shooting the dog. Carlson's really got a bee in his bonnet about it. He's absolutely dead set on getting this dog gone. He says, he don't have no fun, he stinks to beat hell, tell you what, I'll shoot him for you. So, he's almost trying to make out that he's doing Candy a favour by shooting his dog. You can see Candy's clear reluctance to let him do that. He says, I had him from a pup. Maybe it'd hurt him. I don't mind taking care of him. Slim says something which kind of seems to seal the deal. Slim says, that dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I got old and a cripple. And so very quickly the link is being made between attitudes towards the dog that is old and pretty helpless and useless, and people. What happens to people in the 1930s when they get old and crippled and useless? Well, they can't work anymore. They can't support themselves. And because so many of these men are isolated, they don't have any family, there's nowhere for them to go and nothing for them to do. So what Slim's saying here is a really sobering point that basically says that, okay, if we live in a world where it's kind to shoot this dog, then by proxy, that means that it's kind to shoot a person. This is like getting into the idea of euthanasia, or the idea of, when somebody gets to the point where they're no longer useful, they're no longer functioning properly, then, it's kindest to shoot them. And this is a really interesting ethical question in the novel. This question is going to be really important for what happens later on in the story. Now, Steinbeck builds up the tension so well in the bunkhouse as Carlson's led the dog outside to shoot it. Everybody's listening and listening in the quiet. Finally, a shot sounded in the distance. The men looked quickly at the old man, every head turned toward him. For a moment he continued to stare at the ceiling, then he rolled slowly over and faced the wall and lay silent. It's so sad because the dog is Candy's companion, and just like George and Lennie are few and far between people who actually have friends to go round with, this dog has been Candy's only companion, his only friend. He's missing a hand, he's disabled, he can't work as effectively as he used to, and so this is it for Candy, and Candy is seeing in the way that they're treating his dog, the way they're going to treat him when he gets to the point where he can't work anymore. It's a really sad moment and really poignant, not just because this man is losing his dog, but because of what it says about the society they live in. A society that has no time for people who aren't useful anymore.
Hit subscribe if you'd like to follow my vlog for more updates on teaching, reading and studying.